Welcome back to 2 new creepypastas. I hope you enjoy it. The Unseen Choir. My name is Daniel, and for most of my life I've been fascinated by music. It has always been my passion, my refuge from the world. I'm a professional violinist, and I've traveled extensively, performing in concert halls across the globe. However, my love for music has been tainted by an experience that still haunts me to this day. It all started a year ago when I received a peculiar invitation. An old colleague, Professor Gregory Hastings, had invited me to his secluded estate in the English countryside. Gregory was a renowned musicologist and had spent years studying ancient and obscure compositions. His invitation mentioned a rare and unpublished manuscript he had recently acquired, one that he believed would revolutionize our understanding of music. Intrigued, I accepted his invitation, eager to see what he had discovered. The journey to Gregory's estate was long and tiring. The narrow, winding roads seemed to stretch on forever, cutting through dense forests and rolling hills. As I approached the estate, a sense of unease began to settle over me. The house was a grand, old mansion, surrounded by thick woods and shrouded in an eerie silence. Despite my apprehension, I was determined to see Gregory and learn more about his discovery. Gregory greeted me warmly at the door, his eyes gleaming with excitement. He looked older and more haggard than I remembered, but his enthusiasm was infectious. He led me to his study, a large room filled with ancient books, manuscripts, and musical instruments. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, and on it lay the manuscript. The manuscript was old and weathered, its pages yellowed with age. The cover was made of dark leather, embossed with strange symbols that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Gregory explained that the manuscript was an ancient composition, written by an unknown composer. It was titled The Unseen Choir, and Gregory believed it held the key to unlocking a new realm of musical understanding. We spent the next few days studying the manuscript. The music was unlike anything I had ever seen. The notes and rhythms were complex and intricate, and the melodies seemed to evoke emotions I couldn't quite explain. Gregory insisted that we perform the piece, convinced that its true power could only be revealed through live performance. Despite my reservations, I agreed to play. We assembled a small ensemble of musicians, all of whom were as eager as Gregory to explore this mysterious composition. As we began to play, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. The music was beautiful, hauntingly so, but there was something else, something sinister lurking beneath the surface. As we played, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The air grew colder and the shadows seemed to deepen and stretch. The music took on a life of its own, each note resonating with an otherworldly energy. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, as if something was trying to escape, and I struggled to keep playing. The others felt it too. Their faces were pale and strained, their eyes wide with fear. But we couldn't stop. It was as if the music had taken control of us, compelling us to continue. The whispers started then, faint at first, barely audible above the music, but they grew louder, more insistent, until they were all I could hear. The whispers were in a language I didn't recognize, a cacophony of voices that filled my mind with dread. I looked around, hoping to find the source, but there was nothing, only shadows and darkness. The room seemed to warp and twist, the walls closing in around us. I saw the others drop their instruments and cover their ears, their faces contorted in pain and terror. And then, everything went black. I woke up hours later, lying on the floor of the study. The manuscript was gone, and Gregory was nowhere to be found. The other musicians were unconscious, scattered around the room. We were all taken to the hospital, and though we recovered physically, the mental scars remained. The police searched the estate and the surrounding woods, but there was no sign of Gregory or the manuscript. The house was empty, devoid of the warmth and vibrancy it once held. It was as if the music had drained the life from it, leaving behind only shadows and whispers. In the months that followed, I tried to move on with my life. I returned to performing, but the experience had left me changed. The whispers haunted me, a constant reminder of that fateful night. I sought help from doctors, therapists, and even spiritual healers, but nothing could silence them. They were always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to pull me back into the darkness. I began to research the manuscript, desperate to understand what had happened. I discovered that The Unseen Choir was a legend among musicologists, a composition said to be cursed. According to the legend, the music was created by a composer who had made a pact with a dark force entity, trading his soul for the gift of unparalleled musical genius. The music was said to be a gateway, a conduit for the entity to enter our world. The more I learned, the more I realized the truth. The music had awakened something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting for centuries to be set free. Gregory had unknowingly unleashed this entity, and now it was bound to me, its whispers a constant reminder of its presence. I tried to warn others, to tell them about the manuscript and the danger it posed. But no one believed me. They thought I was mad, driven to insanity by the trauma of that night. And maybe they were right. Maybe I was mad. But the whispers were real. I could hear them, always there, always waiting. I don't know how much longer I can endure this. The whispers are growing louder, more insistent. I fear that the entity is growing stronger, that it will soon break free completely. If you're reading this, please heed my warning. If you ever come across the manuscript, the unseen choir, do not play it. Destroy it and never look back. Some music is meant to remain unheard, some secrets meant to remain buried. Because once you hear the whispers, it's already too late. The entity is watching, waiting, and it will stop at nothing to be free. And when it does, there will be no escape, no sanctuary from the darkness that follows. The Vanishing Village. In a remote part of the English countryside, far from the well-trodden paths of tourists, lies the forgotten village of Ravenswood. It is a place steeped in legend and shrouded in mystery, a village that, according to local folklore, appears only once every 100 years. The stories speak of an idyllic hamlet where time stands still, untouched by the ravages of progress. But there is a darker side to these tales, one that warns of the fate that befalls those who venture into its boundaries. The last documented sighting of Ravenswood was in the summer of 1923. A group of hikers, lost and weary, stumbled upon the village as twilight descended. They were greeted warmly by the villagers, who seemed oddly dressed in fashions from a century past. The hikers were offered food and shelter, their strange encounter eased by the villagers' hospitality. As the night wore on, the hikers noticed oddities about Ravenswood. There was an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl or the whisper of the wind through the trees. The villagers, while kind, had an eerie, almost ethereal quality about them, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. One of the hikers, a man named Thomas, grew increasingly uneasy. He wandered the village, noticing the dilapidated state of the buildings and the overgrown paths. It was as if the village had been abandoned for years, yet the villagers moved as though everything was perfectly normal. Thomas's unease turned to dread when he discovered an old photograph in the village inn. It depicted the same villagers, unchanged, standing in front of the same inn, but the date on the photograph was 1823. Heart-pounding, Thomas rushed back to his friends, urging them to leave immediately. His companions laughed off his fears, chalking them up to exhaustion and overactive imagination. But Thomas was insistent, and as midnight approached, his desperation grew. The villagers watched with solemn eyes as Thomas tried to drag his friends away, their expressions unreadable. At the stroke of midnight, a dense fog rolled into the village. The air grew thick and heavy, and an eerie, unearthly glow suffused the surroundings. Thomas's friends, finally sensing something was amiss, agreed to leave. But as they stepped into the fog, the villagers began to chant in a language none of the hikers recognized. The fog enveloped them, and the world seemed to shift and blur. Thomas clung to his friends, but one by one they were pulled from his grasp, their screams swallowed by the mist. The last thing Thomas saw before the darkness took him was the cold, knowing eyes of the villagers, watching silently as he disappeared. When Thomas awoke, he found himself alone on a deserted road, the village of Ravenswood nowhere in sight. Disoriented and terrified, he stumbled to the nearest town and recounted his story to the authorities. A search party was dispatched, but no trace of the village or the missing hikers was ever found.